Isabella sighed as she stared out the window of her small apartment, watching the bustling city streets below. At 28, she had a stable job as a marketing executive, a cozy home, and a tight-knit group of friends. By all accounts, her life was picture perfect. Yet, as she gazed at the sea of strangers rushing by, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Running her fingers through her chestnut hair, Isabella turned away from the window and glanced at the clock. It was time to head to work. She grabbed her bag, smoothed out her pencil skirt, and headed out the door, locking it behind her with a soft click. The marketing firm where Isabella worked was a sleek, modern building in the heart of downtown. As she walked through the glass doors, the familiar scent of coffee and printer ink greeted her. She nodded hello to the receptionist and made her way to the elevator, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Hold the elevator!" A deep voice called out just as the doors began to close. Isabella's hand shot out instinctively, pressing the open button. A tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair rushed in, slightly out of breath. "Thank you," he said, flashing her a warm smile that made his blue eyes crinkle at the corners. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She recognized him immediately. James Hawthorne, the new CEO who had taken over the company just a month ago. She had seen him from afar during company-wide meetings, but never this close. "You're welcome, Mr. Hawthorne," she managed to reply, proud that her voice remained steady. James raised an eyebrow, looking impressed. "You know who I am?" Isabella nodded, feeling a blush creep up her neck. "Of course. I'm Isabella Martinez from the marketing department." "Ah, Isabella," James said, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "I've heard good things about your work. Please call me James." The elevator dinged, signalling their arrival at the top floor where the executive offices were located. As James stepped out, he turned back to Isabella. "It was nice to officially meet you, Isabella. I hope we'll have the chance to work together soon." As the doors closed between them, Isabella let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. There was something about James, his confidence, his kind eyes, the way he said her name, that left her feeling flustered. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. He was her boss, and more than that, he was at least 20 years her senior. Any attraction she felt was inappropriate and needed to be squashed immediately. Over the next few weeks, Isabella threw herself into her work, determined to push thoughts of James from her mind. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. She found herself running into him more and more frequently, in the break room, at the copier, even once at the local coffee shop near the office. Each time, James greeted her warmly, often stopping to chat about work or ask her opinion on various marketing strategies. Isabella couldn't help but feel flattered by his attention. James was intelligent, charismatic, and seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. She found herself looking forward to their chance encounters, her heart racing every time she heard his voice or caught a glimpse of him across the office. One evening, as Isabella was working late to finish a project, a knock on her office door startled her. She looked up to see James standing in the doorway, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. "You're here late," he observed, leaning against the doorframe. Isabella nodded, gesturing to the papers spread across her desk. "Just trying to finish up this proposal for the Johnson account." James stepped into her office, his brow furrowed with concern. "You've been putting in a lot of extra hours lately. I appreciate your dedication, but I don't want you burning yourself out." "I'm fine, really," Isabella assured him, touched by his concern. "I just want to make sure everything is perfect." James smiled, shaking his head slightly. "Perfectionism, I know it well. How about I order us some dinner and we can go over the proposal together? Two heads are better than one, after all." Isabella hesitated. The rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a bad idea, that she shouldn't be alone with her attractive boss late at night. But the part of her that craved his company, that longed to spend more time with him, won out. "That would be great, thank you," she heard herself say. As they worked through the proposal over Chinese takeout, Isabella found herself relaxing in James's presence. He was easy to talk to, and his insights into the project were invaluable. Before she knew it, hours had passed, and the office outside her door had grown dark and quiet. "I think we've done all we can for tonight," James said, leaning back in his chair and stretching. Isabella couldn't help but notice the way his shirt pulled tight across his chest as he did so. "You should head home and get some rest." Isabella nodded, beginning to gather her things. As she reached for her bag, her hand brushed against James. A jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Isabella looked up, meeting James's intense gaze. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken tension. James cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "I'll walk you out," he said, his voice slightly husky. As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Isabella was acutely aware of James's presence beside her. The small space seemed to amplify the tension between them. When the doors opened, James placed a gentle hand on the small of her back as they exited, the warmth of his touch seeping through the thin fabric of her blouse. Outside, the night air was cool against Isabella's flushed skin. She turned to thank James for his help, but the words died on her lips as she saw the way he was looking at her. His blue eyes were dark, with an emotion she couldn't quite name, but it made her heart race. "Isabella," James said softly, taking a step closer to her. I know I shouldn't say this, but I can't stop thinking about you." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. "James, she began, but he cut her off. "I know it's wrong. I'm your boss, I'm older than you, but there's something between us. I feel it every time we're together. Tell me you feel it too." Isabella knew she should deny it, should walk away and pretend this conversation never happened, but standing there with James so close she could smell his cologne, she couldn't bring herself to lie. "I feel it," she whispered. James's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. "We shouldn't do this," he murmured, even as he leaned in closer. "We shouldn't," Isabella agreed, but she made no move to pull away. Their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. Isabella's hands found their way to James's chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palms. James' arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer as he deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Isabella's mind was spinning, a mix of elation and panic swirling within her. "What are we doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't want to stop." That night marked the beginning of a passionate secret affair. Isabella and James stole moments together whenever they could, lingering touches as they passed in the hallway, stolen kisses in empty conference rooms, late nights in the office that had nothing to do with work. Isabella knew what they were doing was wrong. James was her boss, and their relationship could jeopardize both of their careers if anyone found out. But she couldn't bring herself to end it. When she was with James, she felt alive in a way she never had before. He challenged her intellectually, made her laugh, and looked at her in a way that made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. For a while, they managed to keep their relationship hidden, but as weeks turned into months, the strain of secrecy began to take its toll. Isabella found herself constantly on edge at work, afraid that someone would notice the way she and James looked at each other. She began to withdraw from her friends, unable to share this significant part of her life with them. James, too, was struggling. As CEO, he was under constant scrutiny, and the fear of discovery weighed heavily on him. He began to grow distant, cancelling their secret rendezvous more and more frequently. The breaking point came during a company gala. Isabella had spent hours getting ready, choosing a sleek black dress that she knew James would love. But as she watched him from across the room, chatting and laughing with board members and their wives, she felt a crushing sense of loneliness. Later that night, as they slow danced together, maintaining a respectable distance for the benefit of onlookers, James leaned in close to whisper in her ear. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight with tension. Isabella's heart sank. She knew what was coming. They met in James's office after the gala had wound down. Isabella perched on the edge of his desk, her hands twisting nervously in her lap as James paced back and forth. "We can't keep doing this," James finally said, running a hand through his hair. "It's not fair to either of us. You deserve someone who can be with you openly, who can give you a real relationship." Tears pricked at Isabella's eyes. "Is that what you want?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. James stopped pacing, moving to stand in front of her. He took her hands in his touch gentle. "What I want doesn't matter," he said softly. "This relationship, it's hurting both of us. We're constantly looking over our shoulders, afraid of being caught. That's no way to live." Deep down, Isabella knew he was right, but that didn't make it hurt any less. "So this is it?" she asked, a tear slipping down her cheek. James reached up to wipe it away, his hand lingering on her face. "It has to be," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry, Isabella. I never meant for things to go this far." Isabella nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She stood, gathering her things, and headed for the door. As she reached for the handle, James called out to her. "Isabella," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I want you to know. These past few months, they've meant everything to me." She turned back to look at him one last time, memorizing the lines of his face, the warmth in his blue eyes. "Me too," she whispered before slipping out the door. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Isabella's life. Seeing James at work every day, having to pretend that nothing had ever happened between them, was torture. She threw herself into her work, staying late at the office and taking on extra projects to keep her mind occupied. Her friends noticed the change in her. They commented on how tired she looked, how she never seemed to want to go out anymore. But Isabella couldn't bring herself to confide in them. How could she explain that she was heartbroken over a relationship that never should have happened in the first place? As time passed, the raw pain of the breakup began to fade, replaced by a dull ache of regret and longing. Isabella found herself reflecting on the choices that had led her to this point. She had always prided herself on being level-headed and professional, but her affair with James had shown her a side of herself she hadn't known existed, a side that was willing to take risks, to follow her heart even when her head told her it was wrong. One rainy afternoon, about 3 months after their breakup, Isabella found herself alone with James in the elevator once again. The air between them was thick with unspoken words and lingering emotions. "How are you?" James asked, his voice soft and hesitant. Isabella managed a small smile. "I'm okay," she said. "Getting there at least. You?" James nodded. "About the same." He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself before speaking again. "Isabella, I want you to know that I don't regret what happened between us. I regret the pain it caused, the secrecy, but not the time we spent together." Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. "I don't regret it either," she admitted. "It taught me a lot about myself." The elevator dinged, signaling their arrival at Isabella's floor. As she stepped out, James called after her. "Isabella?" She turned back to look at him. "You're an incredible woman," he said, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "Don't let anyone make you forget that." As the elevator doors closed between them, Isabella felt something shift inside her. For the first time since their breakup, she felt a glimmer of hope for the future. In the months that followed, Isabella slowly began to rebuild her life. She reconnected with friends she had neglected during her affair with James, throwing herself into new hobbies and interests. She even started dating again, though she found it hard to connect with anyone the way she had with James. At work, things gradually became easier. She and James developed a professional, cordial relationship. While there was still an undercurrent of tension between them, they were able to work together effectively, their shared history making them a formidable team on projects. As the 1-year anniversary of their first kiss approached, Isabella found herself reflecting on how much had changed. She had grown in ways she never expected, learning valuable lessons about love, professionalism, and her own strength. One evening, as she was leaving the office, she ran into James in the lobby. He was on his way out too, briefcase in hand. "Heading home?" he asked, his tone friendly but cautious. Isabella nodded. "Yeah, it's been a long day." They walked out of the building together, falling into step side by side. The spring air was warm and fragrant with blooming flowers, a stark contrast to the cool autumn night when their affair had begun. "Isabella," James said, stopping suddenly. I've been thinking a lot lately, about us, about what happened. Isabella felt her heart rate pick up. Oh, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. James took a deep breath. I know we can't go back to what we were. Too much has happened, and the reasons we ended things are still valid. But I miss your friendship. I miss being able to talk to you, to share ideas with you. Do you think we could try to be friends? Isabella was quiet for a moment, considering his words. A year ago, the idea of being just friends with James would have been painful, almost impossible to consider. But now, with time and distance between them, she found herself warming to the idea. I'd like that, she said finally, offering him a genuine smile. I've missed our conversations too. James's face lit up with relief and happiness. Great, he said. Maybe we could start with coffee sometime. As friends, of course. Isabella nodded. As friends, she agreed. As they parted ways that evening, Isabella felt a sense of peace wash over her. Her relationship with James had been a whirlwind of passion, secrecy, and heartbreak, but it had also been a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. She had learned that love could come in unexpected packages, that sometimes the heart wants what it wants, regardless of societal norms or professional boundaries, but she had also learned the importance of self-respect, of not compromising her values or her career for a relationship, no matter how intense. Most importantly, she had learned that she was stronger than she ever knew. She had survived heartbreak, had faced her mistakes head-on, and had come out the other side a more confident, self-aware woman. As Isabella walked home that evening, she felt a sense of excitement for the future. Her life hadn't turned out the way she expected. It had been messier, more complicated, and at times more painful than she could have imagined. But it had also been richer, more passionate, and ultimately more rewarding. She didn't know what the future held. Maybe she and James would develop a deep, lasting friendship. Maybe they would drift apart again. Maybe she would meet someone new who would sweep her off her feet in an entirely different way. But whatever happened, Isabella knew she was ready to face it. She had weathered the storm of a forbidden love and had emerged stronger for it. As she unlocked the door to her apartment, she felt a sense of anticipation, wondering what new adventures and lessons life had in store for her. The forbidden relationship with James had been a chapter in her life, an important one, filled with passion and pain in equal measure. But it wasn't the whole story. It was just one part of the complex, beautiful tapestry that was Isabella's life. As she settled in for the evening, Isabella smiled to herself, feeling a sense of contentment that had eluded her for months. She kicked off her heels and padded to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine. The familiar ritual felt different somehow, imbued with a new sense of purpose and self-awareness. Isabella curled up on her couch, her mind drifting back over the tumultuous events of the past year, the stolen glances, the secret rendezvous, the heart-pounding excitement of her affair with James. It all seemed like a lifetime ago, yet the memories were still vivid, a bittersweet reminder of a time when she had felt both more alive and more conflicted than ever before. She took a sip of wine, savouring its rich flavour as she contemplated how much she had changed. The Isabella of a year ago would have been devastated by the idea of being just friends with James. She would have clung to the hope of rekindling their romance, unable to imagine a future without the intoxicating passion they had shared. But now, as she sat in the quiet of her apartment, Isabella realised that she had outgrown that need, the pain of their breakup, the struggle to maintain professionalism in the face of heartbreak, the slow process of rebuilding her life. All of it had shaped her into a stronger, more resilient woman. She thought about James' offer of friendship and felt a warm glow of appreciation. It was a mature, thoughtful gesture, one that acknowledged their shared history while respecting the boundaries they had established. Isabella was surprised to find that she was genuinely looking forward to rebuilding their relationship on this new platonic foundation. As she finished her wine, Isabella's gaze fell on a framed photo on her bookshelf. It was a picture of her with her closest friends, taken at a birthday celebration just a few weeks ago. She remembered how she had withdrawn from them during her affair with James, too caught up in the secrecy and intensity of their relationship to maintain her other connections. Now, Looking at their smiling faces, Isabella felt a rush of gratitude. These were the people who had stood by her, even when they didn't understand why she had become so distant. They had welcomed her back with open arms, supporting her through the aftermath of her breakup without judgment. Isabella made a mental note to plan a girls' night out soon. She wanted to cherish these friendships, to nurture them with the same intensity she had once reserved for her relationship with James. As the night wore on, Isabella found herself reflecting on the lessons she had learned from her forbidden romance. She had discovered the exhilaration of following her heart, even when it led her down a dangerous path. But she had also learned the importance of balance, of not losing herself entirely in another person. Most importantly, she had learned that love, in all its forms, was not something to be feared or avoided, even when it came with complications. Her relationship with James had been fraught with challenges, but it had also brought her joy, growth, and self-discovery. She wouldn't trade that experience, painful as it had been at times, for anything. Isabella yawned, feeling the weight of the day settling over her. As she prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked different from the one who had first kissed James in the shadows outside their office building. Her eyes held a wisdom that hadn't been there before, a quiet confidence born of weathering life's storms. She thought about the coffee she and James had planned. There was a part of her that still fluttered at the thought of seeing him, of sharing conversation and laughter like they used to. But it was a softer feeling now, tempered by time and perspective. She was looking forward to rediscovering their connection, to seeing how it might evolve now that they were both older and wiser. As Isabella drifted off to sleep, her mind was filled with possibilities. She thought about her career, wondering what new challenges and opportunities might arise. She thought about her friends, her family, the relationships she wanted to nurture and strengthen. And yes, she thought about love. Not just romantic love, but all the forms of love that enriched her life. The forbidden relationship with James had been a turning point in her life, a catalyst for growth and change, but it wasn't the end of her story. It was just one chapter in a book that was still being written, page by page, day by day. In the quiet of her bedroom, Isabella made a silent promise to herself. She would embrace life with open arms, ready for whatever joys and sorrows it might bring. She would cherish the lessons she had learned, using them as a foundation to build a richer, more authentic life. And she would never again shy away from love in all its complex, messy, beautiful forms. As sleep finally claimed her, Isabella's lips curved into a small smile. Tomorrow was a new day, full of potential and promise, and she was ready to face it, stronger and more self-aware than ever before. The first rays of sunlight peeked through Isabella's curtains, gently rousing her from her slumber. As she blinked away the remnants of sleep, a sense of anticipation washed over her. Today was the day she and James had agreed to meet for coffee, their first step towards building a friendship from the ashes of their past romance. Isabella took her time getting ready, choosing her outfit with care. She opted for a casual yet polished look, a soft blue blouse paired with well-fitted jeans and comfortable flats. As she applied a light touch of makeup, she realised that for the first time in months, she wasn't trying to impress James or hide her feelings from him. She was simply being herself, and the realisation was liberating. The coffee shop they had chosen was a small, cosy place a few blocks from their office. It was neutral territory, free from the memories and associations of their workplace. As Isabella pushed open the door, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped her, calming her nerves. James was already there, seated at a small table by the window. When he saw her, he stood, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Isabella," he greeted her, his voice carrying a mix of familiarity and uncertainty. "It's good to see you." "You too, James," she replied, surprised by how genuinely she meant it. They ordered their drinks, a latte for Isabella, black coffee for James, and settled into an easy conversation. At first, they stuck to safe topics, work projects, industry news, mutual acquaintances. But as the minutes ticked by, their dialogue deepened, touching on personal hopes, fears, and reflections on the past year. "I want you to know," James said during a lull in the conversation, his eyes serious. That I meant what I said before. I don't regret our time together. It changed me, Isabella, made me realize a lot of things about myself. Isabella nodded, understanding completely. Me too, she admitted. It wasn't easy, but I think I'm a better person for having gone through it all. They shared a look of mutual understanding, years of unspoken emotions passing between them in that moment. Then, almost simultaneously, they both relaxed, as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. As they left the coffee shop an hour later, Isabella felt a sense of closure she hadn't even realized she needed. She and James had acknowledged their past, but more importantly, they had taken the first step towards a new kind of relationship, one built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and genuine friendship. Walking back to her apartment, Isabella felt lighter than she had in months. The forbidden romance that had once consumed her thoughts now felt like a distant memory, a chapter closed but not forgotten. In its place was a sense of possibility, of doors opening rather than closing. She thought about the projects waiting for her at work, the friends she was planning to meet for dinner that weekend, the yoga class she had signed up for on a whim. Her life was full of small joys and new adventures, and she was determined to embrace them all. As she reached her building, Isabella paused, looking up at the clear blue sky. The world seemed brighter somehow, full of promise and potential. She had loved, lost and learned, and she was ready for whatever came next. With a smile on her face and a spring in her step, Isabella headed inside, eager to see what the rest of the day and the rest of her life would bring. The forbidden relationship that had once defined her had become just one part of her story, a stepping stone on her journey to becoming the woman she was meant to be. And as she looked to the future, Isabella knew that whatever challenges or joys lay ahead, she was ready to face them, stronger, wiser, and more herself than ever before.